Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our FIT Authors Talk. Just to give you a little context, FIT Authors Talks is part of the Love Your Library event series and is an initiative of the FIT Library that brings authors from our community to speak about their work. So from photography to fashion illustration, fiction writing to art, these talks encompass a multitude of projects and themes and celebrate creativity across the board. Today, our FIT author is Professor Alexander Nagel, Chair, Art History and Museum Professions Program and Assistant Professor, History of Art Department. Professor Nagel has been teaching in the History of Art at FIT since 2018. I want to give you a little bit of information about Alex and about his book that he'll be discussing tonight. Professor Nagel is actively involved in the research and publication of materials from fieldwork in Iran and Greece. Born and raised in Berlin, Germany, he teaches also on the archaeology and legacies of ancient sites, the history and development of polychromy studies. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Awesome. The role of surface decorations and paint on monuments in the Achaemenid Persian Empire. He also researches ceramic containers, choroplastic industries, and technologies in ancient Greece, Mesopotamia, Iran, and South Arabia. Alex, you're a very busy fellow. He also writes about and teaches about the reception of ancient cultures in the New World. A recipient of many international awards, research grants, and fellowships, Dr. Nagel has published articles from many prestigious publications. As a research associate with the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., Dr. Nagel curated a number of exhibitions and research projects, focusing on the cultures and the legacies of the ancient Mediterranean, Arabia, the Middle East, and Central Asia, as in Washington, D.C. Now, the book tonight, just to give you a little bit of a teaser, is entitled The Color and Meaning in the Art of Achaemenid Persia, and it was published in November 2023. Congratulations, Alex. In this volume, Alex investigates the use of polychromy in the art and architecture of ancient Iran. Focusing on Persepolis, he explores the topic within the context of the modern historiography of Achaemenid art and the scientific investigation of a range of works and monuments in Iran and in museums around the world. Alex's study contextualizes scholarly efforts to retrieve aspects of ancient polychromies in Western Asia and interrogates current debates about the contemporary use of color in the architecture and sculpture of ancient Mediterranean world, especially in North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. Bringing a multidisciplinary perspective to the topic, Alex also highlights the important role of theory, methodology, and conservation studies in this process of reconstructing polychromy in ancient monuments. A celebration of the work of painters, artisans, craftsmen, and women of Iran's past, his volume suggests frameworks through which historical and contemporary research play a dynamic role in the reconstruction of ancient technological knowledge. And I want to give you just a little bit of housekeeping. We do have an active chat, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be very democratic about the process. So the first question that comes in will be the first question asked at the end of the evening's presentation. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. Welcome to you. Welcome, everyone. And Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Karen. I'm just going to make sure to share my screen so everybody can see. I hope.
It looks wonderful.
All right. So thank you for the invitation to speak. I admire so many of our FIT colleagues who have published books also or continue to teach and inspire our students here. So I'm very happy here at FIT, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about my research. So today is also a happy day because today it's the Persian New Year. So today is a celebration because in all of those countries in West Asia, we're going to start tonight really with celebrating a new start of the year. So I hope maybe also my talk will help a little bit cheering up. So for all of the audiences here, also for those who will see this talk at some point later, yeah, I'm grateful for all of the work that went into this talk. So I've been working now in Persepolis in Iran since 2006. So it's quite a long time already. So over these many years, almost 20 years very soon, I had an opportunity to meet really amazing colleagues in Iran, around the world also. So the work that I've been doing now would not have been possible also, obviously, without all of those people who have helped me at some point, be it getting a permission to get a crane somewhere high up to figure out and look for traces of painting, of gilding, and so on, or being it just getting a visa for entry to a country. So you will see lots of photographs also in this short book talk that I discuss. I have a lot of colleagues in Iran also who helped me, but also, as you hear from my accent, I'm from Germany, so I often work with colleagues in Germany, also in Berlin. There's a research laboratory that I worked with who helped me to get a lot of these data that I collected over these years about pigments and gold at Persepolis into my own world. So here we have Iran. Many of you have not been to Iran, I assume, at least here my colleagues at FIT. So this is just a short geographical map to show you where Persepolis is. And Persepolis is not too far from Shiraz. You see Shiraz, a modern city of Iran. So this is about an hour by car from Shiraz to Persepolis. So it's still pretty far, but so, I mean, these distances in Iran really are quite long. You see other cities here like Tehran, the modern capital of Iran in the north, south of the Caspian Sea, and you see Susa here and Babylon, which is in the neighboring modern country of Iraq. So these are these areas also for geography that I focus on. Here you have another map where I have in the lower left side, you see the extents of the ancient Persian Empire. So when I say ancient, I mean about 2,500 to 2,300 years ago. So that's when all of these areas that you see here, those modern nation countries, including parts of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, parts of Greece, Egypt, and North Africa were part of the Persian Empire. They were ruled from those kings who we have heard about. Xerxes, maybe Darius are some names that might be familiar. So these kings were having residencies in Persepolis, in Susa, Babylon, and to other sites that I will briefly mention. So they were traveling around basically in this empire also to make sure that people would pay tribute, taxes, and so on. So this is what happened here. Shiraz, a beautiful city, so nearby Persepolis. So if you go today, visit, it's the cities of the roses, nightingales also. So beautiful cities in modern Iran also that I was able to also visit during this research. I from time to time do tours also for even Americans through Iran. The last one was 2016 tour, so where Americans always also learn about the cultures of Iran and are surprised really by how friendly and how people in Iran really look also out world and are avid readers also of literature, poetry around the world. So Isfahan, here another image, and I want you to keep this blue in mind also, because this is what I think, what I tried also in my research to document, that in ancient Persepolis, this capital of the Persian Empire, we also have encountered so much blue and white and gilding on these facades. So here, this is one of the central buildings. What is remaining of the building in Persepolis is the so-called Apadana. This was built 2,500 years ago within about a period of 20 years. People laid foundations here. It's on a higher terrace, this whole building. The columns, what you see here standing, held a roof initially that was made from of wooden beams that were brought from what is modern Lebanon. So they had very good timber in other parts of the empire. The stone structures are mostly from stone quarries nearby Persepolis. So this was all ordered by the great kings here. These massive monuments on the site that are still preserved really well give us an idea really how visitors back then in ancient times also, so this was painted too at some point, would have experienced visiting Persepolis 2,500 years ago. So as I said, it was built between 520 and 330 BCE. Today, when you go to the site, what you see are these facades, also these gray facades, sometimes black shiny also on these buildings on the site. So they are well preserved, well taken care of by colleagues in Iran. And we have, even for FIT, it's a good thing to focus on fashion, because many of those depictions that we see are not only telling us about what people wore around this time or shortly before, but also what they brought to the king. What we have here in front of us is a tribute scene where people from the empire bring trousers, pants to the great king. We have sheep that were obviously used, the wool and everything was a big important part of the industry, of the textile industries in ancient worlds. We have here wool, wool bowls, you can say, I think, that are being carried by delegations. You see almost pleated like textiles that the other delegation is carrying here. So people brought, we can look at these buildings there and see what people around the Persian Empire also wore, or what they would bring to the great kings. So it's a fascinating case study for textile also and fashion studies in the ancient world. Here you see one of the reconstructions that I focused on also in my work. So I worked with Iranian colleagues also who were doing digital reconstructions of the paint on the facades that I was able to document in these years since 2006. So you also find traces of a big fire that happened under Alexander, the other Alexander the Great, they call him. So who was here in 330 BCE, came to the site of Persepolis and burned down basically most of these upper structures, because they were so much, that's the story how it goes, so much hatred against the Persians, that the buildings were burned down. What you see here on the surface of the stone monument is a calcination process that happens when wooden beams are falling on stone structures. So this is why it's so white today, actually. So that's why you see these white surfaces of some of these stone sculptures. So since 2006, I'm going there on the site, measure with a microscope also that is attached to my laptop what is closer on these stone monuments. So you see the carvings are really also in themselves very intricate. And when you imagine really this bull that I have here, where I have three closer shots, where you still see tiny traces of blue paint preserved on the surface. So you can imagine really also how they attached the blue paint. I'm going to go into this also briefly to these stone surfaces. So I mapped quite good, about, I think about 1,300 photographs or so over these years, also to look for what exact kind of pigment is on which surface. To give another example, this is near Persepolis. There's a tomb facade by one of the Persian kings. They were all buried nearby. We have the tombs of these kings also. And if you go up on this, you still see also by the door traces of blue and green paints preserved. And blue beards, I don't know if you can see this here on your screen. There are little tiny dots of blue, so that indicate us that there was at some point something here on the surface of this beard. Some colors have also changed and faded and had changed appearances over these 2000 years, obviously. But it gives us really a clue how they prepared also. This is the eye of animal sculpture for additional paint layers on top of them. Some of them there was gilding, in fact. So this is, you see me here watching under, you have the hominy in the back. There you see a photograph also in the storage room in Persepolis, looking through some materials. So this is Persepolis again, and close up, Nakshi Rustam that you see in the north is the tomb of Darius the Great King. And this is a really interesting tomb also because it has quite a lot of polychromy, and that leads me to the archive. So one part of my research, this is why I love also being here with Karen today, involved lots of archival research on earlier people who went there and who looked around, who did work at Persepolis. There was an Italian lady who in 1979 wrote a letter from the site also to an American here, that she wanted to study the polychromy of the sculpture and possible connections. But it is kind of a challenge here. 1979, for those of you who know, was the time really when the revolution in Iran also began. So they had some challenges also, those workmen or those workers on the site, to connect. But the person in my book who is really the archival, who I feel I relived his life in some ways, is Ernst Herzfeld, another German who went there between the early 1900s and the 1930s, and he conducted fieldwork at Persepolis and on several occasions, and his archives are today shared between a number of institutions in Washington, D.C., in the Smithsonian Institution, in New York City at the Metropolitan Museum, in Berlin, in Germany, in Chicago, in London, and elsewhere. So everything revolves also quite a bit of traveling when you want to work about Persepolis and Herzfeld. On the tomb of Darius that I just briefly mentioned, this is what you see today when you are standing in front of this mountain cliff. What you see are inscriptions, and you see the king himself also, who's represented standing here, being carried by people from all over the empire, with a winged figure on top, opposite from him. So these facades are really interesting because Herzfeld went up to these facades, and what he did was making, and this is from a modern TV documentation that was a few years ago done in Germany, what he did was putting paper on these inscriptions and having it, putting it wet, and what he did, made negative of these inscriptions and carry them with them. So you see another actual photograph from Persepolis. And these paper squeezes, we call them, are today in museums here in New York, in Washington, D.C. And when I started in 2009 looking closer under the microscope, I saw that many of them had blue pigments also in these. They were never really mapped, documented, or so on. So we mapped them, we found out what kind of pigment it is, and so on. So we can really reconstruct these pigments that were initially on the cover, on the stone reliefs, on this tomb inscription of Darius. Herzfeld also made these beautiful watercolors that are giving us an idea what he saw, but what he never published for most of the time. So he also took fragments from the site. This one is in the Smithsonian Institution. My colleagues and I were able to analyze these. So you see reds, you see blues, greens, and so on. And then you can really look into the detail again, how kind of what how shiny many of these facades and everything was at some point. We have inscriptions only briefly here, the yellow part that I have in the lower part. Only a few parts were painted in bright colors, like the nostrils of the bulls, the neck ornaments, the wings of the great beasts. So I translated a lot of these German letters that were in notebooks by Herzfeld that no one had looked at for many decades. So this helped me also to understand really what earlier visitors to the site had seen at some point. What I also found was photographs that showed how Herzfeld instructed to clean actually people on the site. And this is obviously an issue today also. So with every time we touch upon an object, also you clean it or so, you take away some evidence also of those tiny little pigments that may have been there at some point. So we have earlier reconstructions that were made from buildings on the site that I in my book also compiled a little bit. So looking back to exactly the same structures, here you see this is the textile or the rim, the stone of a textile. And when you zoom in closer, you really see that there was a red paint on this statue itself. So you find also pigments themselves in the storage. I was able to find some from excavations that had never been published also, where they had deposited these pigments. So here you see a map also. It's interesting that many of these paint bowls were in front of stone reliefs actually deposited at some point by the painters, by those who touched upon these monuments. So here you see one also. This is what was a blue that was painted on these facades initially. Many of these blue paints we connect today, people who study the ancient world, with lapis. So this is a precious stone that you have. There are quarries, mountains in Afghanistan mostly, where you still actually have people also today mining lapis, which is a precious blue stone, and then carried through the mountains from Afghanistan to Iran to other parts of the world. So these workmen are, it's hard conditions also where these people are working. And so you find also on archaeological sites, this one is in Susa, the other major capital of the Persian Empire, blue lapis fragments that were brought to the site to be crushed there and then turned into little pieces. So here you see a map. Persepolis is on the very right. Susa is halfway between Persepolis and Babylon. So this is another major site where we still have, you can still go there today. So I went also with American tourists to the site. We looked, saw these stone facades 2,500 years ago, also mostly in ruins today over these many centuries. So, but we know there are also from inscriptions that Darius himself lived on this site of Susa. We have also inscriptions that have been translated that say the men who adorned the wall, those were Medes and Egyptians. So Medes were a local North Iranian group of people. Egyptians is very important for us. So we know that Egyptians obviously were involved also in painting some of these facades. We have in Susa also, there's another Apadana, another major monument, a little palace also. That's called the Shaur Palace that you see on the left side here. In this palace, there were fragments of paint bowls again found, and fragments of wall paintings that had also had these facades. There were brick stones that were covered with wall paintings, lime first and then these paintings. So you can really look also closer again at the skin types even, or at these textiles, what they would have worn over these times that these palaces were created. Again, quite a number of parts of the original construction. We have glazed facades in Susa that are today in Louvre in Paris. These glazed colors also give us an idea how these stone facades were initially painted. So here, this is one fragment on the right. You see, this is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art from Persepolis. The one on the left is from Susa, a stone facade, and you can then closely reconstruct also. If you zoom in closer, find the pigments here on the Metropolitan Museum piece, which I did with my colleague James Pierce here from FIT a few years ago. So we were able also to create an app that people can use in the Metropolitan Museum if they see this object to look over how it was originally painted. So quite a lot of these glazed bricks also that are in collections. This one here is in Washington, D.C., in the Smithsonian, so where I have an office in the Natural History Museum, where I also keep working and analyzing these fragments. So I'm just going to zoom through here a little bit, just to not waste too much time, but the inscriptions that we have found on the side of Persepolis also, you see one here, a small, tiny, this is almost the side of a thumb or of two fingers. These are tiny little clay tablets that have inscriptions on them. They were found in Persepolis, and here you see how the TV show made it. They made these little inscriptions really big, just to give you an idea. They were very tiny, but these were deciphered in recent decades by some scholars who are linguists and philologists also, and they also help us to understand the painters and the decorators who were in these years of Darius and Xerxes active on these sites. So we have painters that are referred to from cities like Kauporis, which has been identified as another small city, not it's too far. It's northwest of Persepolis, in Montana, in Itema, other sites, and we have evidence for female painters also on those tablets that tell us that women were also involved really in the painting of these sites. So we have here come through the site that I just had shown to you. If you walk, it's 21 hours of a walk to Persepolis, so it's quite a trip also that these people had to take. So they mention these women also. We know how many what they received also for the work that they would do on this sites, and so they received barley also. They received other bonus rations, and so we know according to the year also under which Persian king these people were active. Obviously, there's also textiles. So we have these early reconstructions from the 19th century that are featured in my book also. They had the idea really, obviously, that there were a lot of carpets. There were other textile were used in all sorts of different environments in Persepolis and Susa, Babylon. So these reconstructions help us a little bit also to get slowly back to this. One textile fragment has been excavated about 10 years ago, which is really beautiful. It is featured also in my book. This textile fragment is a grid from a worker, not in Persepolis, but near on a mine that was excavated, where a workman was trapped in the mine and his skeleton was excavated together with the clothing that he was wearing. So we have an idea. And finally, this is also obviously for modern Iran. We have painters today active who are beautifying the facades of these buildings. This year, it's a colleague of mine, Mehdi Gadianlo, who has won a prize from the Tehran mayor to beautify the facades of buildings that they have in Tehran that are often gray and not so very nice. But he won an award, so he could paint these facades to make them, these environments, a little bit more attractive also for viewers on those in Tehran, which is a 12 million city metropole. Is also. So here you see Mehdi, who was also working here in Boston a few years ago on a mural. And the inspiration that I got also for my work is by colleagues who work in the field of conservation. So Glenn Wharton had published a book on the painted king of this is a study that I recommend to people who are interested in paint on monuments also, because there's still debate whether we should repaint statues of rulers, of statesmen and so on, because this statue here, for example, in Hawaii was initially painted in the 19th century. And now there's a question, should we repaint these statues to keep the original statue alive and their ideas or not? So these are questions that I try to tackle in my in my book also. So this was just a snapshot. So I thank you everyone for being here, and I'm happy to answer any questions also related to the book or the research. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was wonderful. I'm just really curious if you can answer one question briefly. First, I'll also remind people they can put questions in the chat. But I'm going to kick things off and ask you, what is the significance of polychromy to art history? How would you frame it in that construct?
Thank you, Karen. So polychromy is so important. Some of you may have seen the Chroma exhibition about 2 years ago, I think, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, when the Greeks and the Romans were introduced to us also in their original colors. So when you teach about these ancient monuments, you need to do the surface also analysis to understand how paints have attached, changed, washed away, and so on. Why have they been washed away? What's the reason for this? So polychromy, which is an ancient Greek word, means just poly, many, and chromos is the color. So many colors were everywhere around the ancient world. And for us, traditionally, learning about art history, looking at these gray stones and not understanding really how the painters worked when we are focusing since the Renaissance also so often on Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and all of these great names, but there were women painters and there were others in the ancient world also, that this is what I push for also in the field to look at. So on the other hand, if you allow me, Karen, so it's also about the Persian Empire, because I think we have such a view in our studies here in Western art theory. We always start with the Greeks, the Romans, or Egyptians if we are lucky also, but we have this vast region that we never really talk about also. We are always thinking of the barbarians or those others and so on, but those cultures were so important for what Greece or Rome or so themselves developed. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Absolutely. And we are bustling within the chat for questions. And the first one comes from Beth. What pigments have you found in the places you've taken samples from?
That's a great question, Beth. So, so in Persepolis, there are pigments that were removed by earlier colleagues. I would not myself remove. This is over the years, I also became so sensitive towards the issue of removing paint from a surface. So for me, fortunately, others before me had scrapped off some parts, or it was accidentally fallen or so from some place. So the pigments that we found so far is one is the blue, which I argue also in my book. There are different. They wanted to create different hues of blue. So there's a copper-based pigment that we call Egyptian blue. So this has been really in already since before the Persians. The Egyptians had used this for already 2,500 years. So they have been familiar with the making of these copper-based pigments, and so they would mix these with egg yolk or with so you needed a lot of also poultry and animals in this whole production cycle also. So yeah, blue pigments, we have Egyptian blue, we have ochre, obviously this is a very important one, malachite for green. So there are mines. When you have copper mines, you often have closed also by malachite. So we know now from some colleagues who had done research in around Persepolis, in we call the region Fars, that there were also mines in ancient times that were exploited for these metals, also for that were melted. Also if you have copper, you need to heat this also. So and then at some point in a certain temperature, it creates this blue appearance. So it's a fine, really process. We still have not understood everything. So there's lots of really follow-up work to do on each single pigment. But we can assume also it was such a large empire that there were so many different also resources and recipes also. And I think that often actually these recipes were also within families also of people that would my grandfather was a painter himself, not an artist painter, but he painted walls in Berlin of buildings and of rooms. So when I was a kid also, I would accompany my grandfather sometimes being bored somewhere, just looking at the brushes that he used there and the smell of these paints. I will never forget that also. So I think also the whole idea of the poison also that can come with pigments and so on. There are really a lot of aspects we have not fully yet understood. If that answers, that was a long answer. I hope not too much, Beth. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. Oh, Beth is very happy with your response. Next, we have a question from Anna. Were pigments ever intentionally, oh, it just left out of my view. Hold on one second. Were pigments ever intentionally or ritually buried?
That's a great question. Thank you, Anna, for this one. So that's what I have argued actually in my book also, that the paint bowls that I had shown to you right in front of these buildings, that they were buried intentionally as a kind of a dedication to this building. So what I did not mention is this building, the Apadana, is really one of the most amazing enterprises in the ancient world. You see the columns here in front of you. This is a huge facade. There are about, I think, 300 feet by 300 feet. You only see the upper part here, but the lower part has reliefs, sculptures. And so on this, where these reliefs and sculptures was, this is where the pigments where the bowls, also the fragments of these bowls were excavated, and no one really paid attention to these, which I was found very surprising. So because I think so some people may have thought, okay, they forgot this maybe here, but I think these were really intentional burials also, that those people were so invested in this building, in this whole construction site of Persepolis, that they decided to donate this to this monument. It's a difficult concept, I think, for us to understand. But monuments were also themselves yeah, um, thought to be even alive in some ancient cultures. So I think that these painters left these intentionally on these close to these building sites also. Maybe even for us also, that we know today how we can repaint. So we know there are painters in the 19th, 18th century who wrote the recipes of their paintings on the backside of their paintings. So maybe there was a thought here that in addition we can take into mind. It's a great question, Anna. So I wish I would have an answer. I think there were intentionally buried these bowls. So I made the argument. No one so far has given me a contra yet. I would be happy if someone would just engage also. It's a field also, I have to be saying, not many people work on ancient Persia in the first place. It's people are scared. I understand also for so many reasons and so on. They shouldn't be. I hope that more paint bowls also will and their contexts will be analyzed in the future, not only in Persepolis, but also in, for example, at the Acropolis in Athens in Greece. They found recently also a paint bowl, actually close to the where the Parthenon, where the building was, on the close to the stone reliefs there. So there's a sign also that at other buildings we have painters who left bowls for some reason close to these monuments. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask a question now, which is, you're so passionate about the topic. What was the most exciting aspect of the research you've been conducting for decades?
Mm-hmm. So the most exciting moment I can still remember, I was shivering when I was standing on that bull there that you've seen in the first part. I was shivering when I, for the first time, put my microscope on the surface and saw these tiny little things appearing on my screen there. So that was for me so exciting, and I thought, hey, I made here a big discovery that maybe no one in 2,500 years had seen or so. So that was for me really exciting moment. From that moment, I think that was in 2007 or so in the summer. It was really hot also in Persepolis. There was a power outrage, and so I had to stand on the crane really actually for I think about 3 hours. I was burned red when I came down again, but it was worth it totally, because I mean, for having access really to these close-up shots, that was for me really exciting. The other thing that I found really exciting was to meet people in Iran, to really see how what fantastic really cultures, food. Think about Persian food also, and so having the opportunity also to go to these places is great. So I mean, I wish we would not always read what is in the news and everything, but just take the opportunity to visit also. And explore cultures around the world. So different cultures and how they connect also to each other. You couldn't really understand Greece, honestly, without this whole context of the Persians and the Egyptians that contributed so much to their these high civilizations we always discuss, or Rome. Yeah.
So Matthew has a question in the chat. He asks, what were the paint bases for these ancient paints?
Mhm. The paint basis. So this is still something, because much of this is organic materials. This is for us a challenge that we do not have uh, the technology yet to really go in depth that much detail to see wax or egg yolk, as I mentioned. Also, to find traces of these is so challenging. So that's why there are arguments that are being made also about what could be the base, but there's no kind of clear um, you have uh, evidence at this point. Some of you may have seen that last week only, actually, there was big in the news about a lipstick that was found in for the first time in ancient Iran, even older than Persepolis. So evidence for a bright red paste. It was published on Science or a few days ago by a team working in Iran. And they also were wondering really how they would have attached this red paste to the lips. So the argument there was, I think, also some wax, some structure. The question, is we have to think also, what was available at this point. This is why also really so much nature comes into this research really here. We know that originally around Persepolis, Susa, there were many forests. So trees were abundantly there. They are not there anymore because in so many 2.5 millennia now, there were the trees were rotted and so on. So that's the same with the animals also, that we do not really have aside from the texts where we know that sheep, goat, and so were used, they could have been used for any of these paint pa part parts. What I always think is, for example, for the brushes that we used, they used animal hair. So I mean, I have found one little tiny evidence of a brush stroke on one of these microscopic images that I took, and I think really this is from an animal pig, from a pig or from any or a horse or so, where they had then these tiny little brushes made from, how they attached these paints to the monuments in a more liquid state also. So the whole process, I wish I laid out some ideas in this book, but there's no finite word on this spoken.
I'm actually curious. I know the book was published in November of last year, but have the people of Iran responded to the book? And if so, how?
Thank you, Karen. Also, another very good question. So when I initially was contacted, so Cambridge University Press, which is the publisher for this one, is based in the UK. And I only actually over the months realized that there are sanctions by even British publishing houses against countries like Iran also. So it has been a challenge even to get a book copy. I have friends who brought it in. I say it here publicly now. So, and I know that a copy of my book is in Persepolis now with the librarian there, who's a wonderful friend. I have received an email also from a colleague who has asked for translation of this book because it's in English. So, and I'm totally fine with that. It's now there is already some translation in the work, which is great. So we might have to actually update this one also because just in recent months, I continue to do my research. And in recent months, I was here in New York City in the Brooklyn Museum looking closer at a stone. There is a fragment from Persepolis there, and we found new traces of rather unusual traces of paint. So we can update now actually the book already with extra chapters. That have some more explanations. We did this only about 4 weeks ago, this research here in the Brooklyn Museum. So the new book, I envision a second edition will have more also than new chapters added to it. And I want to also now, being at FIT, it helps me in my discussions with students also to understand textile and fashion methodologies also. So you can also use by the few fragments we have also in Persepolis fragments of textiles to update this with better methodology. Also, I'm not a fashion historian. I mean, I'm happy that I'm here teaching also, but my training is in archaeology and art history. So I learned a lot from my colleagues here also in how to use these theories, technologies also for fashion and textiles. This is one update. I'm having another talk with Iranian colleagues together also. So I try also whenever I could to work with colleagues in Iran or colleagues from Iran who are currently in museums as fellows so for a year we had a wonderful team of colleagues here in the Metropolitan Museum of New York. We are having a co-published 2 articles out later this year. So I'm working currently on white in particular because I'm curious also about white in ancient Persepolis because we often talk about white in ancient Greece and Rome and so on. So I'm curious really how they used whites and what was important for them to show in white, the skin colors also and so on of the people of the empire. So there's a lot here to do with colleagues in Iran. So they are really excited actually about it. I remember the first time that I came, 2006 or 2005, I was the first time there. And my colleagues were really, oh, this is so exciting what you are doing here. So, and yes, please. Let's work together in this. And so over these years, I have been contacted again by colleagues who do small miniature models of Persepolis for the tourists on the site and so on. So they asked me also, could you give us an idea how we could repaint maybe this building or this facade and so on. So I'm in constant communication also. Thankfully, so sanctions cannot reach email communication or phone communication. So people find ways also to bring
Yes.
knowledge across diverse thinking also about other issues in the world. So for me also somehow this research unexpectedly led also into diplomacy, also cultural diplomacy a little bit here for bridging really sometimes tense situations between colleagues and state department. Also, I have a chapter in this book where I really write about the role of archaeologists and historians in these diplomacies also, and there were spies. I mean, I do not want to put everything bright here. There were spies as archaeologists turned and so on who worked on Persepolis and other sites in the 1950s, 60s, and we need to discuss this also. I mean, this is something whenever I do tours also for Americans and they learn about this and their history also and how it had an impact also on everything there. It's a fascinating part of history. We shouldn't erase these. There are other roles that historians, archaeologists, and fashion historians also have, aside from being fascinated about some culture.
Absolutely. We have another question from the chat. Anne asks, or first she says, you say we are slowly uncovering this knowledge about color in Persian spaces. When do you think this knowledge was lost? She's particularly interested in knowing whether the Sasanians, am I
Yeah.
saying that correctly, would have seen these painted monuments.
And this is a great question too. Thank you so very much for this question. I myself have followed in this book also in the final chapter the continued legacy of pigments and painting. So the Sasanians certainly have seen those were the last before the Islamic for those who are not familiar with these cultures. So the Achaemenids, this very difficult word that Karen had mentioned at first, this was the Darius, Xerxes, and so on. And much later we have Parthians, Seleucids, and the Sasanians were the last before Islam became a white religion there. So Sasanian kings also put their own stone reliefs often close to these Persian kings, their tombs and so on, and they painted them too. So we have writers from the 9th century our times that document on paint on Sasanian reliefs. So we know they also kept painting their stones and their reliefs. And then we have a long time, for the 600, 700 years, no reference really to repainted reliefs or something. What we then have is again in the 19th century when we have a new group of, we call them the Qajars in Iran in particular, those rulers, they created their own stone reliefs next to these Sasanian and ancient Persian rulers. And they painted them too. And so I follow in my last chapter of this book how these Qajar rulers also instructed people to repaint or then at some point pigments faded, so they had to repaint their 19th century stone reliefs. And so this is the fascinating part, because at some point you have then a new regime coming into charge, and they will not repaint anymore these ancient statues. So that's why then it's often tied to history and wider context why we lose the information. So we lost it mostly, I would say, after the Sasanians. The knowledge about those painters. We still, for those who study also Muslim Islamic cultures, is often the beautiful miniatures that we have and the tiles, the glazed tiles and so on. There's recently done now by Iranian teams some work on houses in the 11th and 12th century, how they were painted. So there is now really a niche, I think, here that is already slowly filled mostly by Iranian colleagues, that we do not forget how the periods in between were painting their houses and buildings where they lived. And we should also not forget that there were many movable parts of the architecture. When we think about architecture, we think about stones, but there were tents, major, huge tents that were carried around and the entourage of those rulers later periods also. Those were brightly dyed also with dyes. So you had probably also still quite a bit of color actually on that you would see there. So I forgot to mention also we have evidence for paintings, obviously also in Persepolis. I mentioned it briefly for Susa, but there are written stories also who refer to paintings in this empire that were also seen by everyone in the empire. I hope I answered the question. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question and then we'll close. Karen Jones in the chat asks, how do you envision these objects being ideally exhibited with color in a museum context?
That's a great question too. So the Metropolitan Museum is currently closed. Their Ancient Near East department, they are reopening in 2 years from now. What they have now, they're working on, and I was just recently with the team also together. They have an idea to put lights on those stone reliefs to give an idea with a light, a beamer, how these monuments were painted in the ancient times. So they do these kind of approaches in museums. Ideally, I would see also everywhere information more about maybe a color reconstruction also close to the monuments, so that we do not forget this. And of course, on the site also, it would be great really on the site to have more, you can have glasses today also that you can reconstruct walking through as a visitor through a site to see really the monuments, how they were in ancient times painted. So there are ways, technologies these days that allow us really to be used in these reconstructions.
I'm just thinking of like virtual reality and augmented reality and all sorts of technologies that could enhance the viewer experience.
Yeah, yeah. And imagine also when you see the animals, the sheep and everything on these facades, and so what it would make you think a lot really also about what was going on in these cultures back then if we have a virtual construction, virtual reality.
Well, I am just thrilled to have been a part of this evening with you, Alex, and with everyone who attended. I just want to say that your book again is entitled Color and Meaning in the Art of Achaemenid Persia.
Yeah.
Again, published in November. For more information on FIT authors or how to submit to have a feature through the program, go to the website at authors.fitnyc.edu. And you can also follow us on Instagram for information on upcoming FIT authors talks. And that handle is FIT NYC Library. And I cannot thank you all enough, especially you, Alex. It's been a delight.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I mean, I know that we will continue archive discussions also because this is
Yes.
something I deeply care also about, Karen. Thank you for making sure that archivists also are honored also, and the archives of Persepolis need to be also be held safe. Yeah, thank you, Karen, for
You're a
doing this.
marvelous champion. Thank you, Alex. And
Right.
Jen, do we have any other parting words?
No, we're all good.
All
Yeah,
right.
okay.
So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.